Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverines Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. With me on our Game Day segment this week is Michigan basketball radio play-by-play voice, Brian Boesch. It's a relatively quiet time on the Michigan athletic scene right now as the school year winds down. There is still football recruiting in full swing, and basketball is working hard to reshape the roster for next season. I think we all agree last season was frustrating and disappointing to watch. We had a roster loaded with talent, but something was off. Chemistry, youth, lack of intensity, whatever was going wrong just never got fixed. Since the season ended, there have been some developments we expected and one we did not. Kobe Buffkin and Juwan Howard are heading to the NBA. Are they ready? That doesn't seem to be the right question in our new environment. Can they develop into productive NBA players at some point? That seems to be the only question teams ask now when scouting and drafting young talent. Then there is the Hunter Dickinson story. Why would he leave now? When all is said and done, will he be back in Ann Arbor for another season? My guest today says all of that and more makes this a pivotal offseason for Juwan Howard and his program. Joining us today with his thoughts on the state of Michigan basketball is the radio play-by-play voice of the Wolverines, Brian Boesch. So stay with us. Here with us on our Game Day segment this week is Michigan basketball radio play-by-play voice Brian Boesch. Brian, as always, it's great to have you join us.
Always good to be here. Thanks for having me, Mike.
Well, there has been so much happening since the season ended. It's almost mind-boggling what's going on. And let's start with Hunter Dickinson. There are reports this week he's meeting with Maryland and Georgetown soon, unofficial visits. Both schools pretty close to where he grew up, so that could be a big part of the interest, but I'm sure there's more, isn't there, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, I think from Hunter Dickinson's standpoint, I think he, by coming back for this junior season that we just finished, I think that kind of showed that he was going to take as much advantage of college as he possibly could. And, obviously last season did not go the way that Michigan was expecting that it would go. When you go to 5 straight Sweet 16s, you expect to, at the very least, get back into the NCAA tournament. And Hunter's somebody who, he's always had a very outward personality. He's somebody who I think understands that, there is more to all of this than just bouncing the basketball, right? There's a business side. I think he wants to go into broadcasting when he's done with playing basketball, whether that's in 1 year, 2 years, 15 years, if he carves out a professional career for himself. From his standpoint, I don't think he took the decision to enter the transfer portal lightly. I don't know where he's going to end up going, but I do think that he felt like he needed to see how he could maximize his opportunity, not just with NIL. This guy wants to win. And, he's as competitive as you can find. I always thought the relationship with him and other people in the program was pretty good. Certainly when you have a losing season, there's frustration to go around everywhere, right? That's just how it goes. So where this ends up, who knows? But, I hope two things could happen at once. One, people appreciate what Hunter Dickinson brought to this program for 3 years. And two, with holding out hope that maybe he will indeed try to, potentially come back to Michigan, understanding that this is a new part of college basketball. And just because Hunter Dickinson leaves the program does not mean that Michigan cannot contend. It's just going to be most likely in a very different way than what we've seen over the last 3 years, with Hunter as either a pretty important part of the team, which was his freshman year, or the most important part of the team, his sophomore and junior years.
Well, these are the times we're living in college sports, college basketball. So from season to season, we don't know what is going to happen, what a team is going to look like. But in Hunter's case, do you think this decision sort of caught people by surprise?
I would say certainly as somebody who, really since the start of his sophomore year as the face of the program, anytime that happens, it is surprising. If you look at the transfer portal number last week or the week before, that it was around 20% of Division I players were in the transfer portal, which is a mind-boggling number. That is, a high major player who's not playing as much, like an Isaiah Barnes, for an example, who goes to Tulsa, or a mid-major player who wants to try to get up to the power conference level. And we've seen that plenty. Michigan has delved into that pipeline in recent seasons, to be sure. So you don't normally have a guy who's been All-American, who's been a Big Ten Player of the Year candidate, do that. So, yeah, I think it certainly was a surprise. But, I think that this shows you and should show everybody, whether they're a fan or they're a player or they're a coach, that the transfer portal is no one should just be assumed it's a unique part of the game. But, if there were people who were surprised by the Hunter Dickinson move, then I think this might shock their system to say, I shouldn't be surprised if anybody enters the transfer portal.
Well, and as you mentioned, Michigan is reportedly they're going to sit down and talk with Hunter, according to what we've been reading, and see what what's on his mind, where he is in the process. I'm sure NIL will have something to do with it. So it really still, with everything that's happened, it's not out of the question that he could stay in Ann Arbor, is it, Brian?
No, I mean, remember what happened with Kofi Coburn? He entered the portal, obviously got a ton of interest, and then decided to come back. I do think that Hunter Dickinson, he does value his legacy, and he talked about it after the Wisconsin game where he hit that shot. That was a legacy shot, and I'm of the belief that certainly as time passes, if Hunter Dickinson elects to take his final 2 years of eligibility elsewhere, I do think that down the road, fans at with Michigan around the program here in Ann Arbor in the state will come to really appreciate and think of Hunter Dickinson fondly, right? Mm-hmm. It'll be a little bit raw right now because he will go somewhere else and play a couple of years of college basketball, and it'll be very odd to see him in a different uniform if that is how it goes. But I do think that his legacy will still be pretty well intact for what he's done to this point. But he does have a chance if he were to stay here for 2 more seasons. Again, he's got 2 more years of eligibility. I mean, his name would be littered all over the all-time record books if he played 2 more seasons and just maintained the average of productivity he's had to this point. There are only a handful of names and numbers, recognized in Michigan basketball history. I mean, he's got the potential to be one of those guys if he comes back. And I do think that is a part of the conversation of the process for him. But also when you have 2 more years of college basketball, and that's probably going to be where you will be able to maximize your basketball ability from a financial standpoint, I can't blame him for at least exploring his options. So it like anything else, this is not as simple as, Hunter was unhappy with something. I don't think he was, but everybody in the program was. That was a uniform belief. But there are others to all of this. And I think, look at it this way. Hunter Dickinson is as vocal, is as willing to talk, is as willing to expound upon his feelings as anybody I've ever encountered in sports, especially at this level, right? Like when you are the poster player for a program like Michigan, and he hasn't said much, right? He hasn't been very vocal at all. He hasn't done a lot of that stuff. And I've always said I love that aspect of him. I think now there have been a couple of times where I've disagreed with what he said and where he in what situation and timing he said it in or done it in. But man, Hunter is a guy who makes sports fun. So for him to take this in a way where he's not being really playful about it or out in the open about it shows you that this is a very serious. I would be surprised if he's sitting here right now thinking, okay, I'm definitely moving on from being that way, right? Mm-hmm. But I don't think that Michigan's out of this by any stretch. I don't have any information on that. But just based on the tea leaves and getting to know him a little bit, reason to believe that it should happen. But if you're that coaching staff at Chrysler Center, you need to start thinking about how to move on from him, right? Yeah. You want to try to keep him because he's a great player. But if he does not come back, then your roster, a couple of years, the team I think has tried to build with Hunter Dickinson front of mind.
Well, as they say, stay tuned. We'll see what happens with Hunter. It should be an interesting next couple of weeks or however long the process takes. But as we mentioned, Brian, a lot of things happening with the program since the end of the season. Some things we expected. Kobe Buffkin, Juwan Howard are both projected as high round draft picks. So, I mean, it was disappointing. I'm sure that's what fans are thinking to see them make that announcement. But, you know, in reality, you can't fault them for that decision, can you, Brian?
No, I mean, if you're projected to be a round one type of a player, it is very difficult to go back on that. And you know, I think the chatter about Juwan Howard had started pretty quickly, right? I mean, he came in, he was an instant scorer for this team, and it kind of felt like, oh yeah, you know, this could be a one and done type of situation. Kobe Buffkin's ascension, it seemed like he was on a rocket ship, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
he went from in December, some people kind of thinking, okay, you know, we've seen some flashes, but curious what this will become, to, you know, at times last year, I thought Kobe Buffkin was the best player on the floor, and that included Hunter, and that included other people on the other team, right? I mean, he was awesome as a two-way player. The way he matured was just phenomenal. And with Buffkin, you know, it's kind of odd because his great season, of course, was this past one, but his great moment was really the last moment he played any consequential basketball for Michigan as a freshman, and that was that shot against Ohio State. So, you know, maybe there'd be a little bit more of a full circle fulfillment with what Michigan fans got to enjoy about a Kobe Buffkin had that shot come this season and gotten Michigan into the NCAA tournament, because it would have kind of meshed with what he had become for this program. But two really likable young men. Yeah, obviously, with Jet being banged up down the stretch, we didn't get to see him kind of fully formed as a freshman. But, you know, obviously, I think they're two individuals that, you know, Michigan fans should pull for. Obviously, both with really strong ties to either the program, with Jet being the son of Juwan, or Kobe, the state kid, who just, you know, I mean, what he absorbed as a freshman, being younger than everybody, younger than Jet. I'm fascinated by what he can become, and I can see both of those guys, you know, being really interesting conversations for people in the NBA, maybe as early as the tail end of the lottery. But I'd be surprised if we did not hear each of those young men's names in the first round coming up in the NBA draft.
Well, it seems like that's what the NBA types think is going to happen. And, you know, after watching them both play, you can understand it. One of the other players we thought we might get back, though, is Joey Baker, who was an important cog this year. He was talking about coming back, and, you know, then all of a sudden he says he's going to give pro ball a try. Now, he didn't say where, but you think he's an NBA-type player, or is he maybe thinking Euro ball?
Yeah, I think he's probably thinking overseas. You know, he's somebody who I think has kind of understood the big picture, been thankful for the opportunities he's quite worked out in the way that, you know, you would expect as a top 50 recruit like he was, whether it was injuries. Yeah, I think he's a guy who can carve out a name for himself and be a real potential option for, you know, some of these teams overseas. I just don't think he showed enough in his college career. And I think a lot of it was circumstantial to allow him to do that. But, hey, you know what? He should give it a chance, right? I mean, he should go and work out for teams and see what he could potentially drive up. I mean, the reality is NBA teams are not going to turn down shooting. And certainly Joey Baker is going to have to be a guy who will have to go through, you know, depth of the G League and try to really, you know, make that climb. But, no, is it preposterous? No, but I do think probably that Europe overseas aspect is going to be the more likely approach.
Well, Juwan and the staff are faced with, because of what we've been talking about, you know, remaking next year's team, and they've done a great job getting started in the transfer portal. It certainly isn't, I don't think, official yet or finished, but there are three names that we're hearing about that possibly could join the roster next year. And let's just talk about some of those names we're hearing about, Brian, starting with Namari Bennett, who's an interesting player from Alabama.
Yeah, and obviously first Texas Tech, he was a target of Michigan at the outset. I mean, listen, this is a program that had trouble last season figuring things out at the forward position, right? You had the Juwan Howard injuries at the three. You know, the power forward position was an area where, you know, I think we saw Will Cheddar take a step forward to go from, you know, a redshirt season to being able to give Michigan some valuable minutes. Terrence Williams II didn't have that, that breakout going from, occasionally used as a freshman to, a glue guy as a sophomore to a real scorer and starter and potential all-conference guy as a junior, right? Maybe he is just kind of that, that sophomore year version, which is still very valuable. So Michigan, needs some guys who can play multiple positions, who can have some offensive and defensive upside. Obviously, Burnett being a Chicago kid, I think that's obviously a helpful tie when it comes to Coach Howard and getting to know him. And I think, listen, when you come from that Alabama program, you had a lot of transfers, a lot of talent there. I wouldn't be so worried about some of the numbers or lack thereof for him, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is a guy who has that type of upside, and I think we could be sitting here a year from now and talking about him going to the NBA. We could talk about him being a potentially dud of a signee. I think his range is pretty wide of potential outcomes, but when you are trying to reimagine your program, thinking about it without Hunter Dickinson, I think it's a unique and I think it's a pretty shrewd roll of the dice to try to take.
One of the other names that we're hearing is Caleb Love from North Carolina, which I think surprised me hearing his name mentioned. But as far as the transfer portal goes, I think he's ranked as the number 4 guy out there. So that would be a big catch, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you want to talk about reinventing things, right? I mean, Caleb Love can be a walking bucket, and it happened a lot more 2 seasons ago than 1 season ago. It's somebody who, if he, and when he gets on campus, he's going to be the kind of guy that commands the basketball, that takes a lot of shots. And, oftentimes, if this is the way that Michigan will go, say Hunter Dickinson goes elsewhere, you will kind of ride with Caleb Love. And we've seen that work to get to the Monday night in April.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen that, not make the NCAA tournament. It, again, is a high upside, potential low floor type of a play. But ultimately, I think that's the one thing that makes having your team run through a center a little bit challenging is that, late in games, it's difficult to get a post-up look for a 7-footer, right? I mean, if you look at Hunter Dickinson's iconic play in his Michigan career is a 3-point shot with 2 seconds left because he was tall and T-Will had to heave it up to him. It is a lot easier late in the game when you need to find a shot to go through somebody that's Caleb Love's size versus Hunter Dickinson's size. So I'm fascinated by what it would look like. I think it would, again, show the drastic change in program trajectory and philosophy and offensive set if he were to, kind of be the focal point. But again, when you lose a guy like Hunter Dickinson, potentially, you got to get really creative and upside wise. There's nobody, let me put it this way. I think from an upside standpoint, there is nobody who has a higher upside in the portal, Hunter Dickinson included, than Caleb Love. Now, the floor, Hunter Dickinson's floor is significantly higher than Caleb Love's, but from an upside standpoint, this guy, he could be as good as it gets.
The other name we're hearing is Trey Jackson from Seton Hall. Really interesting guy. Top 100 guy coming out of high school in Detroit. Maybe not as celebrated as Burnett or Love when you're talking about transfer portal prospects, but man, he could fill a big hole for this team, couldn't he?
I think from a size standpoint, from a proximity standpoint, a Detroit kid, this feels like more kind of a depth piece as somebody who has the ability to, provide Michigan with some help underneath, right? I mean, Michigan has, at this point on the roster, you've got a guy in Terrace Reed who, listen, I'm enamored by, I'm elated by what he can become, but there's still some refinement that needs to happen. When you have somebody like Trey Jackson who, he's not putting up huge minutes by any stretch in his career, right? I mean, he's never averaged more than 20 minutes a game in his first 4 seasons. So it's not somebody who's going to come in and be a 30-minute-a-night type of a guy. But as a backup option, is somebody who, especially from a Terrace Reed standpoint, Terrace has to work on his free throws, has to work on his fouling. Trey Jackson in limited time has shot 75% from the line. Foul-wise, regardless of how many he had, and he had a decent amount in his career, you have another guy who can eat up minutes. Now you've got 10 fouls to work with instead of just 5 with Terrace Reed Jr. So I thought that was a good move. It's not a huge upside one. I think, again, we talk about range and potential outcomes. I think this one's a little bit more shrunk and modest, but you can't, if you bring in 8 Caleb Love types in terms of like wanting the basketball, needing the basketball to live up to the potential, or Namari Burnett, who, he's got the ability and the potential, but we haven't seen it realized. We got a lot of those guys. It's tough. Sometimes you need to go into the portal and get somebody who can play at 15 to 20 minutes. And I think that's where Trey Jackson solidifies something like that for Michigan on the inside.
Well, Brian, I think the roster, and I could be wrong about this, is right now, depending on how all of the portal things go, is at the 13 scholarship limit. There's talk Juwan is still looking at a few other portal options. How he'd get those numbers down, or the 13 scholarships, I don't know. But the names I've seen reported here in the last week or so that have been interesting are Florida State wing Matthew Cleveland, St. John wing A.J. Storr. Either one of those guys would be nice additions, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I think this team could really benefit from one more wing player. I think if you look at the roster as it's locked in right now, assuming that everything goes smoothly, and again I'm just saying that because it's not official and I'm kind of tangentially with the program, right? So I'm not trying to say any doomsday stuff. I'm just saying it hasn't been announced yet. Yeah. But if that all gets solidified, I think the backcourt looks like there's a lot of potential there, and that's assuming that a Jalen Llewellyn gets that okay to come back for one more season and he's healthy. And then certainly when you add a Trey Jackson to Terrace Reed Jr. You've got some, certainly Michigan would not be as big as they have played at times in the last few seasons because of the loss of Hunter Dickinson. But I would love to see one more proven wing player. I think guys like T. Will and Will Cheddar and Yo-Yo, right, Yusuf Kayat, I think those are guys who can grow into roles or expand upon their roles next season. But it would be nice to have one more bit of insurance there. And where Juwan Howard comes from, the NBA, the wing players are so dynamic, right? I mean, if you can have several, it's what made that Big Ten championship team in Coach Howard's second season so good, is you had the ability to put 2 or 3 of basically the same type of just awesome wings on the floor of Franz and Isaiah and Sean D. I'd love to see one more just to give you that type of option. But as it stands right now, it would be a fascinating roster, right? And it would behoove the entire program to make sure that some of these guys who didn't play a whole lot last year, that they get to a point where they can contribute. Remember, Juwan Howard in his time at Michigan, by the end of the season, has basically been at a 7 or 8 man rotation. So you don't need to have an 11-man rotation going into the season. But if you look at this team right now, I think you can see, 5 or 6 guys you feel really confident about. Hey, if they're healthy, if they come into this program, they should be, able to play pretty big minutes on a team that can win some games in the Big Ten. Now, can you elevate that to 7 or 8 or even 9, and then have some wiggle room in case of injury? That would be wonderful. And I think at the wing spot is where Michigan could best benefit from that type of an addition.
In the last few weeks since the season ended, we as a fan base have been spending a lot of time talking about who's out there in the portal, who could be coming, but really there's still a lot of in-house or returning talent, developing talent to be excited about on this roster, isn't there, Brian?
I think what makes the program and the foundation of the program right now really unique is that you had 2 guys in Doug McDaniel, and I think that's the first time I've said Doug's name in this podcast, and that's not a knock on him. I think Doug's probably the future of this program. Doug and Terrace are 2 guys who, A, have shown a great deal of potential in their careers, and they're just 1 year long, right? And B, I think what makes it unique right now is because of just how they are body-wise, they're not that Jet Howard, Kobe Buffkin, Franz Wagner type of players who just make NBA teams salivate thinking, okay, even if it's not totally refined yet, we still want to go and grab them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Doug, because of his height, is always going to be playing from behind, and that's not, it's unfair for him, but it's just a natural situation, right? And Terrace, I saw Terrace. We're going to have him on our podcast here in a couple of weeks. He's already starting to really get into the gym with John Sanderson. He's going to look different to fans in a good way come November. I promise you that. And he's going to be able to shoulder more of a load. But these are two guys who I think have the ability to be 3-4 type year guys, right? Mm-hmm. Players who will eventually want to try their hand in the NBA, but just because of where their size is at this point, it might not be as an instant, okay, we see some productivity, the NBA wants to bring you in because you've got the prototypical size. So, 3 more years of the Doug and Terrace show with some, pieces and parts brought in, that is a foundation. That is a starting point for this program that should excite Michigan fans. It might look a little bit different year to year. And certainly with no Hunter Dickinson this season, if that is indeed the case, it will look very different last season to this coming season. But Doug and Terrace is a foundation that not many Big Ten, not many power conference teams possess. Doesn't mean anything. They need a lot of help because every two-man duo needs a lot of help in college basketball. But those are the two that I think hold the keys to what this program can be next season and hopefully for the couple of seasons after that.
Well, I guess as of today in mid-April on paper, Brian, this looks to be a very nice rebuild by Juwan and staff. There's still a lot of pieces moving, but, once we get this team set, getting everyone to mesh together and the chemistry is the real challenge once the season starts next year, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a philosophical change, right? Assuming, as we talked about, if Hunter's gone, this team will have to look completely different. And that doesn't mean that it's going to necessarily be better or worse, right? It's just going to have to be very different. And I think we saw in, Juwan Howard's first season that, he could be a little bit different using players who weren't necessarily quote unquote his, right? A Xavier Simpson and John Teskey led program to get to what would have been probably a 6 or a 7 seed in the NCAA tournament. And who knows what would have happened. There's a lot of people wondering what if that year. This will be a philosophical change, but this program has consistency. The staff is still intact. This is a program that has experienced a lot of winning, and there's got to be a motivational factor amongst those who are still here, who were a part of that season a year ago. Last year was tough. They had so many close calls. They proved it and almost in the same week, they proved they could beat anybody in the country and they could lose to anybody in the country. There's got to be a motivational factor, a chip on the shoulder. And I think for the guys that are, likely to come in from a transfer portal, same type of a deal. It doesn't guarantee you anything. Everybody can talk about their adversity, their shoulder chip, whatever it might be. But I do think from a Michigan basketball standpoint, the players, especially who have been here already for more than at least a season, they know that this is not where the program normally is. There were a couple of these pivot points in the John Beilein era, and it resulted in better things the next season. This is the first time that Juwan Howard has led a program coming off a season like they just had, where they didn't get to the dance by their own fault, right? Not by a pandemic's fault. So I'm fascinated by it. I think it's going to be a really interesting roster, even if it is just as it stands right now. But it will require a different level of coaching, a different level of scheme, a different level of leadership than what this team has had for the last few seasons. And that's a little, I can understand fans being a little bit concerned, scared by it. But you know what? You've got to adapt. You've got to grow. And I think, this team, if there's no Hunter Dickinson, might look a little bit more like a Juwan Howard NBA style team, right? Because there is no back to the basket type of a center, more guard and wing based. And hey, that can very much win in college basketball. There's no doubt.
Oh, absolutely, it can. Well, final question before we let you get away, Brian. Last season, I think we all agreed, disappointing, especially how it ended, and then we had the player departures, and even though some of those were expected, it still hurts. In the current environment of college basketball, Brian, I get this from fans all the time now, especially we older fans. Is this the kind of offseason we should understand as the new normal in college basketball?
Certainly allowed transfer portals, yes. When the face of your program enters the portal, that is a little unexpected. I wouldn't expect that every season. But the reality is that I think we've had situations where a player has left, after a freshman or a sophomore season to go to the NBA. Inevitably, you have big losses. Eli Brooks, that was just a flat out end of, eligibility type of a departure. I think the days of, having a homegrown core of 5-6 players who come through in the same way, that's probably not going to happen as much. But, some semblance of this is going to happen each season. This is just probably a little bit more significant than other years.
Well, it is different. It is a change, but it's exciting. There's a lot of things to look forward to here in the off season. There's a lot of developing news with Hunter, the portal, and then looking forward to next season. So we shall see. Here with us today has been Michigan basketball radio play-by-play voice Brian Boesch. Brian, always great to have you on the show. You're very gracious with your time, and we look forward to that next visit.
Always happy to do it. All the best.
On Quick Hits today, Michigan baseball was shut out 13-0 by Rutgers on Friday in the series opener at Bainton Field. The Wolverines will look to draw even in the series on Saturday at noon when they take on the Scarlet Knights at their place. Michigan is 18-15 overall, 6-4 in Big Ten play. Sophomore pitcher Lauren Durkowski struck out 13 en route to her first collegiate no-hitter as softball earned a 4-0 win in its series opener at Purdue on Friday evening. It was the Wolverines' fourth straight win. Due to rain in the forecast later this weekend, the Wolverines will now play at 2 p.m. today on Saturday as we're recording and wrap up the weekend series a day earlier than originally scheduled. The ladies are 21-15 overall, 7-4 in Big Ten action. That will do it for now. Make sure you tell your Michigan family and friends about the show and join us again next time. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Have a great Wolverine week, everyone. Until we meet again, take care, and as always, go blue. Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!